If you drafted Jerick McKinnon last year, your chances of winning your fantasy football league increased by 115%. Today, we'll be discussing 10 late round running backs going in the 8th round or after that we believe have similar upside in 2023. To discuss this today, I'm joined by Drew Dinkmeyer and Jack Miller of Established the Run. Let's get into it here with James Cook, Drew, and they get rid of Devin Singletary. We know the Bills have an extremely high-powered offense. Now, Damian Harris is there, Latavius Murray is there, but I do expect James Cook to be the starter. And if you just close your eyes and say, I'm going to get the starting running back and a good pass catcher on one of the best offenses in the NFL in the 7th, 8th, 9th round, to me, that's pretty exciting. Drew, any thoughts on James Cook?
Yeah, the name you mentioned in the lead-in, Jerick McKinnon, very similar, right? High-profile pass-catching running back on an elite offense. The difference is you get big playability with James Cook. Averaged 6.5 yards per carry in college, averaged 5.7 yards per carry in his rookie season in the NFL. Explosive, big play back with the pass-catching ability in an offense that should have plenty of players to clear out downfield with Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Dalton Kincaid, all players that can clear out the downfield area, open up the middle of the field for James Cook. Big pass catching opportunity, big play opportunity in the elite offense.
Yeah, I absolutely love James Cook, particularly in PPR formats. And I know Josh Allen has not had a really high running back target rate in his career, but I do think James Cook will be a target earner on a team that needs it. Let's go to Zack Charbonnet. Seahawks surprisingly used a 2nd-round pick on Charbonnet, even though I thought Kenneth Walker had a really strong rookie year. Now, the problem with Kenneth Walker was he was a little bit boomer bust and he was not spectacular in the passing game. So you enter Charbonnet, who's a bit more consistent and is better in the pass game. Drew, what do you think about Zack Charbonnet here as the 1B, presumably, to Kenneth Walker?
Yeah, pretty similar situation to last year. We loved Kenneth Walker as a late round running back because the running back in front of him had some nicks on the resume as well. And with Kenneth Walker, big playability, but ranked dead last out of running backs with 100 plus carries in success rate last season. So a running back that struggled to get the easy yards or the short yardage yards. Well, high value touches, passing game touches, and goal line opportunities are the two most valuable things for running backs in fantasy. Charbonnet has a clear path to both, as Kenneth Walker was not much of a receiver in college. Charbonnet was, totaling over 35 catches in his senior season.
Yeah, I actually still like Kenneth Walker as kind of a middle round pick, a 5th round pick or so. Just such an explosive talent on an offense that I want to bet on. I actually think that it's fine to take Kenneth Walker in round 5 and then come back with Charbonnet in round 10 or 11. I think that makes plenty of sense as well. All right, let's get Jack in here for the Commanders. Brian Robinson is the presumed big back for new offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy, while Antonio Gibson will fill the pass game role. Jack, what do you think about Brian Robinson here in his 2nd season with the Commanders?
Yeah, Robinson started off slow, which is pretty understandable considering he was recovering from a gunshot wound. But over his last 5 games, he averaged 19.4 yards per carry and 4.5 yards per attempt, both of which were far above his season high. He was pretty one-dimensional last year with only 12 targets on the year, but he flashed some pass-catching ability during his final season at Alabama with 35 receptions that year. And then the Commanders GM pretty much outright named Robinson as the reason that they became run heavier over the year. The Commanders started out pretty balanced offensively. And GM Martin Mayhew said that it was because they didn't have that between the tackles runner like Robinson, and they were one of the run heaviest teams in football down the stretch. So I think they like Robinson a pretty good amount. And Antonio Gibson is going to get the pass catching work, but Robinson should see a slight uptick in that area compared to where he was last year. And I think it's reasonable, given the injury he was recovering from last year, to expect a more efficient season overall.
I started the offseason actually higher on Antonio Gibson than Brian Robinson. I have flip-flopped there because I have some concerns that Eric Bieniemy is not going to run this extreme pass-happy basketball on the field type offense like the Chiefs did with Andy Reid and Bieniemy out there in Kansas City when you have Sam Howell and not Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, there's a big, big difference there. I'm afraid that Eric Bieniemy could have some boomer tendencies here and look for a ton of Brian Robinson between the tackles. And what if Antonio Gibson only has some type of JD McKissick role, 4 or so carries per game, and then the clear pass down work? That leaves a ton for Brian Robinson. So especially in half PPR, I think Brian Robinson has a pretty reasonable touchdown expectation. And I think his ceiling on touches on a game-to-game basis is actually way higher than people think. So yeah, Brian Robinson is one for me, especially in more touchdown-heavy formats, I think is really nice. Go to a rookie here in Miami, Devon Achane. Now, they have Raheem Mostert, they have Jeff Wilson, but Devon Achane is the kind of back that Mike McDaniel really gets excited about. Excellent as a pass catcher, can do a ton of yak. We see that everywhere from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. They want guys who can do things with the ball after they get the ball in their hands. Achane hopefully should be that for the Dolphins. Jack, how big of an impact can Achane have here in year one?
I think Achane can have a pretty big impact. He's got the speed that Mike McDaniel values so highly. Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson are probably going to start the year as the primary early down backs, but both of them are kind of getting up there in age and have an injury history. So Achane could start the year in a more receiving role and just McDaniel using his skill set out in space. But then if something happens to Mostert or Wilson, or Achane just performs well and earns more work, I think there's some pretty good upside here. It's such an efficient offense when Tua is healthy, and he looks healthy going into the season. So I think Achane has some fun upside here, especially in leagues where you get a point per reception.
One thing about the Dolphins pass catching group is they don't really have a strong wide receiver 3 that's going to command targets, or a wide receiver 4 that's going to command targets. They let go of Mike Gesicki. They have pretty much dust at tight end now in terms of pass catching. So there's a lot of room for Achane to catch plenty of balls here. Also, Raheem Mostert is now over 30 years old, has a long injury history. Jeff Wilson has a long injury history as well. So there's contingent value as well as I think some standalone value on Devon Achane. Jalen Warren, Drew, was awesome as a rookie. I think by most or all underlying metrics, Jalen Warren actually outperformed Najee Harris. Now we get into year 3 of Najee Harris. They do have round 1 draft capital tied up in him, which I actually think is going to make them continue to pound the ball with Najee Harris. But man, at some point they just can't ignore how good Jalen Warren is. Can the Steelers? Drew, how much can Jalen Warren cut in to Najee Harris this year?
Yeah, there's the potential to cut in a lot. This is the 3rd year for Najee Harris, so we're getting towards the end of that rookie contract. Perhaps they decide to kind of take a sunk cost and get more opportunities for the more explosive playmaker in the backfield. Last year, Jalen Warren averaged 4.7 yards per carry compared to 3.7 for Najee Harris, and yards per touch were about 1.5 yards difference in terms of the benefit to Jalen Warren as well. He was capable as a pass catcher, and the Steelers have really, added to the offensive line by drafting Darnell Washington as a tight end who's an elite run blocker as well. So I think the Steelers are going to have success on the ground. Najee Harris's role is ripe for the taking with the way that Jalen Warren's performed and the way that Najee Harris has performed in the first 2 years. I love Jalen Warren as a late round target.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be overly comfortable standalone starting Jalen Warren right away because I can only project maybe 30 or 35% of the running back touches to go there. As the bye weeks and injuries start to hit, you can live with that. And again, as Drew said, A, Jalen Warren can just earn more work because we think he's probably better than Najee Harris, or B, something can happen to Najee Harris. So where Jalen Warren goes so late, I think really, really solid pick on both standalone in a pinch and contingent value. All right, Jack. Everybody's excited about Tank Bixby. I mean, really, really excited. Now, there's been some things said about Travis Etienne's rookie year, which I'm not sure I agree with. I thought coming off of the foot injury, Travis Etienne was actually really, really impressive and explosive in a lot of games. The problem is he failed in short yardage. I think that's a bit of a small sample, but he failed, and we'll see what the team thinks about that. On top of that, Travis Etienne, the tape bros do not like Travis Etienne as a pass catcher, and that showed through in his rookie year. Was not efficient, was not voluminous at all at earning targets, was Travis Etienne. So they use a 3rd-round pick here on Tank Bixby, who was an excellent pass catcher at Auburn, and then also is a bit bigger than Travis Etienne, at least if you believe those pictures that are coming out of Jaguars camp. So, Jack, how much can Tank Bixby do for us as a rookie here in Jacksonville?
Yeah, I think Etienne is pretty clearly the RB1 in between the 20s, but for fantasy purposes, the touches we care about most are in the receiving game and near the goal line. And Etienne, like you mentioned, averaged a 0.13 yards or targets per route run, which is not a good number. And then on short yardage situations, he scored on just 2 of 10 carries inside the 5 and 4 of 23 inside the 10-yard line, which probably isn't the most predictive stat on a year-to-year basis, but that level of inefficiency in short yardage situations combined with what Jaguars coaches have been saying about specifically bringing in Bixby for those short yardage situations. It might not matter if his rate stats regress in that area if he's just straight up not getting those touches anymore. So I think Bixby could come in and get some high value touches right away. ETN's still probably going to be the primary running back on early downs, but if something happens to ETN, then Bixby could be looking at all of the work in high value situations and in between the 20. So that's some interesting contingent value from the rookie.
I don't think that it really matters like what we think. Like I think Travis Etienne would probably be fine in short yardage over the course of his career, but clearly the Jaguars coaches were concerned enough by his struggles there in year one to draft Bixby and talk about him in short yardage. And then in the first preseason game, the Jaguars starters get one opportunity in short yardage and Bixby comes on the field. That was his only snap with the starters, but they bring Bixby on the field specifically for a 3rd and 1 in their first preseason game with the starters. And yeah, I mean, you could make a case that Bixby's a better pass catcher than ETN right now as a rookie. And so I know that sounds like a hot take, but yeah, Bixby has at least a chance for some big time high value touches in Jacksonville. Kenny Gainwell has been a guy that we have been on all offseason, Drew. And the main reason is they did not give Rashad Penny much money. He has a long injury history. They did not give up much to acquire DeAndre Swift, who has a history of coaches not wanting to use him. The guy that the Eagles are the most familiar with is actually Gainwell, who you saw a role spike massively during their Super Bowl run last year. I don't think Kenny Gainwell is going to be the starter. I don't think Kenny Gainwell is going to be a feature back. I think he'll be the backup to both Rashad Penny on early downs and DeAndre Swift on pass downs. But I do think that Kenny Gainwell will play a ton in 2-minute and 4-minute, which is very, very, very valuable. Drew, this Eagles backfield has been a mess. Probably one of the biggest fantasy storylines of the 2023 season is the Eagles backfield. Where do you think Gainwell fits in here?
Yeah, I think people are spending too much time trying to figure out a pecking order in the Eagles backfield instead of just understanding that, hey, the Eagles have the best offensive line in football. They have a great quarterback. They're going to score a lot of points, and they're going to have a lot of fantasy points available to the running back position just by the nature of the success of their offense overall. As you allude to, Gainwell had the highest snap share of all the running backs in the Super Bowl when they were playing from behind, when it mattered most. One of the reasons we love the Eagles last year was a really soft schedule that had them playing from ahead most of the season. This year, after being a Super Bowl runner-up, the schedule is going to be much, much more difficult. We could see more passing down opportunities for them. And I think that's going to lead to more Kenny Gainwell on the field just naturally. So, mid-teens rounds ADP for Kenny Gainwell just as a cheap piece of an elite offense. He's shown good pass catching skills in his career. He's been efficient as a runner. They've shown a willingness to use running backs of all sizes at different levels. We've seen Boston Scott used in goal-to-go situations as well. So there's lots of opportunity here for Kenny Gainwell just to have kind of a season that incrementally adds points week over week over week simply by being a part of this great Eagles offense.
Yeah. Close your eyes. Eagles offense, late round picks that are going to see usage in a ambiguous backfield. Kenny Gainwell makes a ton of sense. One that is a bit tougher, I think, to see is Tyler Algier, Jack, because we know the Falcons used the number 8 overall pick on Bijan Robinson. I mean, if you use the number 8 overall pick on Bijan Robinson and then throw Tyler Algier out there for a ton of snaps, that is not a good use of draft capital. Now, do Arthur Smith and the Falcons care about that? That's a question that we need to answer. Jack, what do you think about Algier versus Bijan this year?
I mean, Bijan's going to be the RB1, but the Falcons also had the second lowest pass rate over expectation of any team in the last decade. So they're just going to have a ton of rush attempts. So Bijan can be the clear RB1, and Algier can still get 8 to 10 carries per game sometimes. And the Falcons have a top 10 offensive line, according to ETR's Brandon Thorne. So I think 8 to 10 carries, he'll sometimes stumble into the end zone and you'll get a usable week out of him. And then if something ever happens to Bijan Robinson, you're looking at a guy who's a must start. The Falcons really transitioned away from Cordero Patterson near the end of last year and gave Algier all those touches. So I think if something happens to Robinson, it's going to be Algier getting, flirting with 20 carries a game every week. And so I think that he should have some standalone value, but the contingent upside if something happens to Robinson in the run heaviest offense in football behind a good offensive line is pretty enticing.
I mean, it's going to sound crazy. I think the best argument for Tyler Algier right now is that Arthur Smith and this Falcons coaching staff does not care where guys are drafted, does not care about your fantasy team. We saw them use massive draft capital, top 10 picks on Kyle Pitts and Drake London, and then have the highest run rate I've ever seen. And like they just don't care. And so just because they use the number 8 overall pick on Bijan doesn't mean Bijan is going to play 100% of the snaps. In fact, Algier could still play something like a Jalen Warren role. Arthur Smith just doesn't care. Have you seen this guy's mustache? So yeah, I'm tilting a bit about the Kyle Pitts and Drake London runouts from last year, but I do think that it's warranted to understand that just because Bijan went so high doesn't mean he's going to play every single snap. I think he'll play a ton and he'll go over 300 touches, but there's still room for Algier, I think is the point. Jerome Ford is the presumed backup to Nick Chubb. They let go of Kareem Hunt. They don't bring in anyone else. Jerome Ford, someone most people have probably never heard of, is going to be the direct backup to Nick Chubb, who, by the way, has not been a participant on pass downs throughout most of his NFL career. Jerome Ford, Drew, tell the people a little bit about him.
Yeah, only 8 carries for 12 yards last year, so probably not on your radar based on last season production. But all the offseason tea leaves in terms of how they've treated this running back position signal a confidence level in Jerome Ford. They let go of Kareem Hunt. They don't bring in anyone else to replace him. They don't look at anybody in the draft at the running back position, a position that looks pretty thin on the roster after Nick Chubb. Last year, Kareem Hunt had 123 carries and nearly 45 to 50 targets as well. So a big opportunity set when Kareem Hunt wasn't even efficient last year. 3.8 yards per carry, struggled in the pass game with the same level of efficiency it had in the past. So they were willing to give that much work to somebody who wasn't performing super well for them. That leaves a lot of opportunity on the bone potentially for Jerome Ford here, who they did not play in their first preseason game. Another indication of a lot of confidence in his ability to be the backup running back to Nick Chubb. We'll see if they unleash Nick Chubb in a full load, 3-down back role. Perhaps that's their intention and that's their case. But if it's not, the opportunity that we saw Kareem Hunt had that allowed him to be kind of a mid-round running back is right there for Jerome Ford, who's available in the teens.
Yeah, I don't think it will be their intention to use Nick Chubb as a true 3-down back. I think if they get into games where they feel like they really, really need Nick Chubb out there, they can't trust anyone else. It's a close game late. Maybe you see a bit more Nick Chubb, but I think they will go into the season with the intention of mixing in other guys. And there's no doubt that Jerome Ford is that guy right now. Just keep an eye on a hamstring injury for Jerome Ford he picked up early in August. Be sure you watch that keep an eye on that before your draft. Last one we're going to talk about here today, Jack, is Ty Chandler. Now, Dalvin Cook was cut by the Minnesota Vikings. Alexander Mattison is the presumed every down back. However, Alexander Mattison, a lot of people don't think is good enough to hold that job for the whole season. Jack, do you think Ty Chandler can overtake Mattison at some point here? And what do you think his outlook is?
Yeah, Chandler's another guy who, if you just go based on his last year's stats, you're probably not super interested. He had just 6 carries for 20 yards as a rookie. But like you said, with Dalvin Cook out of town, he looks like he's in line for the RB2 job. Reports out of Minnesota's camp indicate that it's him versus Keenan Nwangu for the RB2 job, and Nwangu never had more than 3 catches or 61 carries in a college season. He's more of just a space back. So Chandler, I think, is going to have the upper hand there. Madison has never, he's performed well in Dalvin Cook's absences over a short spurt, but he's never sustained that workload for a full year. And if he fails or if he gets injured, Chandler looks like he's probably going to be the guy. In preseason week 1, the Vikings treated him as such. Granted, Nwangu was out, but he had 4 targets and 4 catches on 22 snaps, forced a bunch of missed tackles. So I think Ty Chandler, you can get him in the literal last round. He's the RB2 favorite on a good offense behind a guy who's never had a full workload for an entire season. So I think that's a pretty interesting bet.
Yeah, Chandler a little bit smaller, but I think explosive and a good pass catcher. And this Kirk Cousins offense is going to have plenty of room for checkdowns, expecting them to be in a ton of shootouts this year with a bad defense, playing 11 games in a dome. The way Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison play, you're going to get into a ton of shootouts, and Ty Chandler could catch plenty of balls here. Explosive player. I think Madison will be a workhorse, a bit of a boring workhorse for the Vikings, but a workhorse nonetheless. Ty Chandler has the more explosive option available very, very late as Jack said. All right, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more. And for access to our fantasy football rankings and analysis, check out our 2023 draft kit.